What is up, everybody? Welcome to Sales Stories in Real Life, where professional salespeople tell their story on times that they were on the receiving end and they were actually sold something. Today, we have an extremely special guest. He is the founder at Fluent.io, and Fluent.io helps enterprise sellers to stop losing deals when they're not in the room. Their blog actually just released the library of uncommon sales practices. Welcome to the show, Mr. Nate Nasralla. I hear you had an interesting experience buying a car. What happened there?
I did. And out of all of my buying experiences, I'm talking like software in the office, around the house, it is the one buying experience for me, sales experience that I was on the receiving end that sticks out of everything. And I kind of like that because most people think about like the dealership experience is like the epitome of what you shouldn't do as a seller and what buyers hate. And yet I love that experience most as a buyer. So if you want me to just like dig right into it, I'm happy. But that's why I think this story is pretty fun because again, like when most people talk about the sales profession and they've had a bad experience, what do you say? Like how would you describe a negative sales experience? It felt like a
Used car salesman.
there you go. Exactly. So I can just jump right into it if you're down for it.
Nate, we're ready. I'm pretty sure we've all had an awful experience at a car dealership. So you're going to do all the car salesmen proud right now with this one. Let's hear it.
That's right. So for the longest time, I drove a manual stick shift hatchback. And my wife had been on me for a while of like, Nate, we need to get an automatic car. Like, you got to give up this car. I want to be able to drive it. Like, we're out on a road trip. I can't drive stick. Something's got to go. I'm like, all right. So we start going around to different dealerships. And from dealership to dealership, you start to like see yourself in a car. And like a car is a statement about yourself. Right. So I'm like not just going to go in and make a quick decision or buy just any old car out there. So we live in Colorado. I love to backpack. I like to hike. So where do we find ourselves eventually? The Jeep dealership, right? Very classic. And so for me, going into the Jeep dealership is about like a lifestyle thing as much as anything else, right? So we walk in and I go first to the most beautiful car on the showroom floor, which is the Trackhawk. Now the Trackhawk is souped up, goes fast, real fast. It's also about 100K. And I don't like buying expensive cars because it is money that just you start losing the minute you drive it off the lot, right? So I'm sitting in this beautiful Jeep, and salesman walks up and he says, "Hey, you should probably get out of that Jeep." And so I look at him and I'm like, "Oh, okay. Am I not allowed to sit in here? Like I know it's a nice one." He's like, "No, like the longer you sit in here, the more likely you will become to buy it. And this is the most expensive car on the lot. So you probably don't want to spend a lot of time in there." I was like, "All right, I like this guy." So I get out, I'm walking around. My wife had been looking at other cars. And so he asked like, "Hey, why did you guys find yourself at Jeep?" And so I'm like, "Well, I'm trading in, stick shift, and I'm looking for just something else, a little different." So I give him a very shallow, surface level answer. He's like, "Okay." He turns to my wife. I'm almost not there for like a minute and a half, and he starts asking my wife about first any connection to Jeep. Well, it turns out the first car that she ever drove that her uncle gifted her was a Jeep. And so he starts kind of learning and understanding what the connection to the brand, the affinity is. And then he starts asking her. And he's like, "So when you think about a Jeep today, like, what, or just a car generally, like, what is it? What are you most interested in?" And safety comes up, right? So she's like, "We want to be growing our family. We want to be having kids. I want to make sure that the car is safe." So once he understands like the baseline that's going to drive the decision, which ultimately it's my car, but like, look, if if I don't have her on board and she's not excited about it, we're not getting this car, like plain and simple, right? And he does it in just such like a conversational way. To then he goes back to me and he's like, "I imagine there are some other things, that you're interested in." And so kind of walking around, he uses examples of different cars and says like, "What don't you like about this one? What don't you like about this one?" And it was really interesting for him to start that way, as opposed to like the classic of like, tell me all of the things you're looking for in the perfect vehicle, and then I'll show you exactly that. And so he's actually like trying to figure out like, how can I not waste time showing you things that I know you're immediately going to shoot down? And so, for example, like one of the things that was really important to me is like, there's kind of some mythology around the Nasralla drivers. We tend to drive, somewhat aggressively. I think I'm just not slow is the way that I would describe my driving style. But so for me, especially like living in the mountains, trying to pass slow drivers, like going up a mountain pass, acceleration, torque, very important to me, right? And so he's, kind of beginning to build like this profile of the car. So he's like, okay, I think these are the ones that, you should drive. You guys have the time for a test drive. I'm like, yeah, it'd be great. So he throws me the keys. We're going out and he sits in the back seat. He has my wife and I sitting up front, and he doesn't say a word the entire test drive. And his point is like, and he says this to us, he's like, hey, if you guys are going to be, driving, taking road trips, like living your life in this car, I want you to see what it's like. Do whatever you want to do, drive however you would want to drive. And I'm just back here. And so what do? I go to like an empty lot where there's not many people around, and I'm testing the acceleration as hard as I can. And he's just back there, like hanging out the whole ride. And it was part of like the question in my mind. I was like, so is this guy like going to tell me what I can and can't do and like try to be pointing stuff out constantly? And he just lets me experience what it's like to drive this car. So we go back and I'm like, you never make a big decision immediately, right? But throughout it, like it touches on all of the key points, the nostalgia for my wife, like the image of the outdoor lifestyle that we love, all of the functional requirements. I got to experience it, but I'm like, okay, we need to sleep on this, right? So come back and I'm talking with him again. And I'm like, look, here are the things that after like sleeping on it, like I just didn't love. One of those things was it just didn't have the torque, the pickup for me. And to get that, you're moving up from just like a Grand Cherokee into the SRT8 into like other kind of pricing levels. And so he's like, hey, look, man, I think what you're ultimately after is what a diesel is going to get you. High end torque, some of the mileage that you loved in this hatchback, the space and the safety that your wife is after. And he's like, I just don't think that Jeep has that for you. And this is the interesting twist in the story, right? I didn't actually end up buying that Jeep from him. What I ended up buying is the track that he put me on, which was an Audi Q5 TDI. One of the last years that they made was 2015, 2016. They stopped making the diesel, but I found a used diesel, one of a couple left in the US, and it happened to be right in Parker, Colorado. It had everything that I wanted. And so I bought it. And so it's kind of a funny end to the story of like, I didn't end up buying. However, it was literally the best sales experience or buying experience for me that I've ever had. And it's so memorable and it sticks with me.
I have so much to dig into. I don't even know where to begin. But first off, I promise I won't share this video footage with Denver PD. We will keep your driving tendencies.
It's all hypothetical anyway. Did I not say that at the beginning?
But I mean, seriously, let's call out the elephant in the room. Is there's going to be a sales manager, a salesperson watching this that says, hey, that salesperson failed, right? They didn't get the sale. They gave the sale to somebody else. Inevitably, somebody's going to say that, or someone's going to think that. Mm-hmm. What would you say to that person?
So I have sent no less than 5 friends to that salesperson and to that dealership. And yeah, I mean, look, it comes down to one of two ways. Like you will lose more deals than you will win, right? That's just the fact. The average win rate across the entire sales floor, 25, 30%, some closer to 20%, like in that range, 20 to 30%. Now, certain reps are amazing, right? They're pushing 60, 70%, which is great. But the fact, if you're a VP of sales listening to this and you're like, I don't want my sales reps losing deals, they will lose more deals than they will win. So how do you turn those lost deals, which is the majority of your pipeline, into more deals that you can win? Referrals, word of mouth. It comes down to the experience. And I would emphasize and focus on the buying experience over the closed deal, because that turns into even more revenue over the long term if you make that the first priority that you're focused on.
And in this circumstance, the salesperson, let's just say, bypassed one forced deal. Maybe you would have been happy with it, maybe you wouldn't have been, to 5 extremely hot deals, right? Where immediately the trust is there. We know we want to work with this guy, and counting. I'm sure you'll continue to send people to him.
That's right. And by the way, my wife has been talking about, so she drives kind of an older used BMW. The maintenance gets a little crazy. And again, I don't buy new cars. We don't buy extravagant cars. And she has a big affinity for Jeeps. So like, what am I going to do when we're ready? I'm going to send him a text and be like, yo, can you keep an eye out? Cause like, it'll be pretty specific. Like I want this model year range. She likes this model. Keep an eye out and then text me when the car is in and we'll come drive it. Right. So you could, if you kept us in his pipeline, it would be an incredibly long sales cycle, but I would still consider myself like a legit prospect because I had such a good experience with him.
I love that. I could keep talking about this, the entire time, but I did want to go back to something in the very beginning, because as you mentioned, the used car salesman is just the classic example of the ickiness in sales. And right away, you're sitting in the most expensive car in the lot, the most expensive car in the showroom, and someone comes over to you and says, hey, you should get out of there because it's the most expensive car in the lot. Like, what does that do for you? Because again, salespeople are very acutely aware of when we're being sold. We sell for a living. So when you're in that moment, what's going through your head?
The first thing was like, one, I like this guy, but two, it was the reason why I like this guy is because he's not here to tell me the things that he thinks I want to hear. Like, he's got a bit of an edge to him, which means there's a little bit of like very baseline openness on my end to share with him. So had he flipped me the keys, like what would I have done? I would have been like, yes, like let's go for a drive. But would that relate to my willingness to buy? No, I have never and will never spend that amount of money in a car. It's just a personal thing. And so again, like he could get a very seemingly engaged buyer. I definitely would have taken it for a drive, but it would have done nothing to actually help a deal or a relationship develop.
Love that distinction. So any professional salesperson, any B2B seller watching this, what's their takeaway out of all this?
So the takeaway is to build a sense of like unconditional trust with the buyer that you're in it for them and for their best interest, even if it doesn't work out in the short term for you. Do what's best for that buyer. See them off, get them to the goal that they want to. And if you move them forward to that goal, it's going to come back around and it's going to support you long term.
I have nothing to add on top of that because that was so good as is. I think this is a perfect spot to cut it here. Nate, why don't you take a moment and plug something with the audience? I know you've got a lot up your sleeve.
Yeah, well, hey, you just mentioned it. We released what we call the Library of Uncommon Sales Practices. And we call it a library because there are about 30 different authors who all came together to talk about how they sell in ways that are different from everybody else. So it's totally free. It's ungated. If you go to fluent.io/blog, it'll be right up there and check it out. It's kind of why I love the way that you are building this content. It's sellers talking about buying, kind of same type thing. Think differently, act differently as a seller. Library of Uncommon Sales Practices. Go check it out.
Fluent.io, people, you heard it here first. Nate, thank you so much. This has been amazing. I'm sure we'll all see the Jeep salesperson in the library as well. No, just totally kidding. Folks, stay tuned for next week. Nate, you've been amazing. Thank you guys so much, and we'll see you next week.